As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Nothing in this world happens by accident. Not a single event, not a single breath, not a single wound inflicted upon you has escaped the sovereign decree of God. When you were betrayed, when they spoke against you, when they left you in the darkness to suffer alone, you may have thought, where was God? But I tell you today, He was not absent. He was not indifferent. He was not looking the other way. He was orchestrating every moment. You say, how could that be? How could a loving God allow such suffering? Because God is not like us. His ways are higher than our ways, and His thoughts are higher than our thoughts. We are creatures of comfort, seeking only what is easy, what is pleasant, what makes sense to us. But God, He seeks something far greater. He seeks His glory in you, through you, even in the breaking of you. You need to understand something. The very people who wounded you, who turned against you, who made you feel like nothing, they were not outside of God's plan. They were His instruments. You may call them enemies, but in reality they were tools in the hands of a sovereign God, chiseling away at the parts of you that do not belong in His kingdom. Do you think Joseph understood when his own brothers threw him into a pit? When he was sold into slavery? When he was falsely accused and imprisoned? At that moment, did he look up and say, "Ah, yes, I see the beautiful plan of God in this suffering"? No, he felt the pain. He wrestled with the questions. But years later, when he stood before his brothers as the second most powerful man in Egypt, he saw clearly, "You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." Genesis 50:20. Do you hear that? God didn't just use their evil for good. He meant it for good. He willed it. He planned it. Some of you are struggling right now because you have been taught a weak and shallow view of God, a view that says God only allows things, He doesn't ordain them. But that is not the God of the Bible. That is not the God who declares the end from the beginning, the God who works all things according to the counsel of His will. Ephesians 1:11. Do you understand what all things means? It means everything. Your victories and your failures, your joys and your sorrows, your promotions and your betrayals, your healing and your wounds. Some of you have spent years questioning God, accusing Him, demanding explanations. Why did you let them hurt me? Why didn't you stop it? But I tell you, the question you should be asking is this: Lord, what are you doing in me through this? Because if you are His child, He is not destroying you. He is shaping you. Look at Job. Satan did not touch him without God's permission. Do you realize that? Satan had to ask. And when God granted permission, He did not say, well, I'll just allow this and see what happens. No, God had a purpose, a reason, a plan. Job lost everything: his wealth, his family, his health. His friends accused him. His wife told him to curse God and die. But in the end, what happened? Job said, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Job 42:5. Some of you think you know God because you've read about Him, you've sung about Him, you've memorized verses about Him. But God says, I will take you through the fire so that you will see me. And when you come out on the other side, you will not be the same person. God is not in the business of making you comfortable. He is in the business of making you holy. And that means He will break you. He will strip away everything that keeps you from depending on Him. He will take away the idols, the pride, the self-sufficiency, the shallow faith that only stands in good times. Because the goal of your life is not comfort, it is Christ. Look at Jesus. He was not merely wounded by sinners. He was crushed by the will of the Father. Isaiah 53:10 says, it pleased the Lord to crush Him. Do you understand what that means? The cross was not just the work of men. It was the plan of God. And if God willed suffering for His own Son, do you think you will be spared? If He was betrayed, if He was abandoned, if He was falsely accused and rejected, do you think you will not taste the same suffering? Some of you are still clinging to the idea that the Christian life is meant to be smooth, that if you just do the right things, you won't have to suffer. That is a lie. Jesus said, in this world you will have tribulation, John 16:33. Not might have, will have. You will be hated, you will be rejected, you will be hurt, but here is the hope. It is all under God's control. He is not reacting to your suffering. He is ruling over it. He is not pacing the heavens, worried about what is happening to you. He is directing it. And when you finally stand before Him, when you see the full picture, you will not say, "Why did you let them hurt me?" You will fall on your face and worship, because you will see that every pain, every loss, every betrayal was used to shape you into the image of Christ. So stop fighting God in your suffering. Stop resenting Him for the wounds. Trust Him. Trust that the one who called you by name, who sent His Son to die for you, who has numbered every hair on your head, has not lost control of your life. The hands that hold the universe are the same hands that are holding you in your suffering. And when the day comes that you stand before Him, when your faith is made sight, when every tear is wiped away, you will not regret a single wound. You will not wish He had spared you from the suffering. You will look into His glorious face and say, "It was worth it." As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Some of you are asking, "Why is this happening to me?" You're walking through the fire and it feels like it's never going to end. The pain is unbearable. The wounds are deep. The betrayal, the rejection, the suffering, it has left you broken. And you're crying out, "God, where are you? Why would you allow this?" But listen to me, God is not trying to destroy you. He is purifying you. He is stripping away everything in you that is not of Him. He is tearing apart the false securities, the pride, the self-reliance, the love of this world. He is refining you like gold in the fire. Do you know how gold is purified? It is placed in the furnace, heated until it melts, until the impurities rise to the surface so they can be removed. And that process is not gentle, it is violent. The fire does not ask the gold for permission. It consumes, it burns, it breaks, until all that is left is purity. And that is exactly what God is doing in you. You say, "But I don't understand. Why does it have to hurt so much?" Because there are things in you, deep things, hidden things, that you would never let go of unless they were burned away. You love too many things that are not of God. You trust too much in what you can see, in what you can hold, in what makes sense to you. And God says, "I will remove it even if I have to take you through the fire to do it." Think about Peter. He was bold, he was strong, he was confident in himself. He swore to Jesus, "Even if all fall away, I will never fall away." But Jesus knew. Jesus knew that Peter wasn't ready. He knew there was pride in Peter, self-reliance, and untested faith. So what did Jesus say? "Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I have prayed for you that your faith may not fail." Did you hear that? Jesus did not say, "Satan has asked to sift you, but I told him no." No, He allowed it. He ordained it. Why? Because Peter needed to be broken. He needed to see that all his confidence in himself was worthless. And when Peter denied Christ 3 times, when he wept bitterly, when he realized he was nothing apart from God's grace, that was the moment of purification. Some of you are going through the sifting right now. God is allowing you to be tested, allowing you to be broken, because there is still too much of you in you. And He is preparing you for something greater. You see, we all love the idea of being used by God. We want to be strong. We want to be effective. We want to be like Christ. But we don't want the breaking. We don't want the suffering. We don't want the fire. But listen, there are no shortcuts to holiness. You do not become like Christ by sitting in comfort. You become like Christ by walking the same road He walked. And that road leads to a cross. Look at Isaiah when he stood before the throne of God. He was a prophet, a man of God, but the moment he saw the holiness of God, he cried out, "Woe is me, I am undone." And what happened next? A burning coal was taken from the altar and touched to his lips. Fire, pain, purification, and then he was ready to be sent. Some of you want to be used by God, but you don't want the coal to touch your lips. You don't want the fire to burn away your sin, your pride, your love of this world. But God is saying, "I will make you useful, but first I will purify you." This is why suffering comes. This is why people betray you, why circumstances strip you, why trials seem to come one after another, because God is pulling you away from the things that do not belong in your life. He is cutting away everything that keeps you from trusting Him fully. And some of you are fighting it. You are resisting. You are holding on to things that God is trying to remove. And that is why it hurts even more. When Job lost everything, his wealth, his health, his family, He could have cursed God. He could have resisted. But what did he say? The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He understood. He knew that God was in control, that nothing had been taken from him outside of God's will. Do you understand that? Do you see that nothing has been stripped from you outside of God's sovereign hand? Some of you have been abandoned. Some of you have lost relationships, lost security, lost everything you once held dear, and you are crying out, God, why? But I tell you, God is answering you even in the silence. He is saying, because I love you too much to leave you where you are, because you were clinging to things that were never meant to satisfy you, because you were trusting in people, in comfort, in circumstances, instead of in me. God does not tear down without rebuilding. He does not break without the purpose of healing. And when you come through this, when you have been purified, when everything that is not of Christ has been burned away, you will not be weaker, you will be stronger, not in yourself, but in Him. Some of you are praying for deliverance, and God is saying, no, not yet, because the fire has not finished its work, because there is still dross that needs to be removed, because He is making you into something greater than you ever imagined. And when you finally stand before Him, when all of this life is behind you, you will see that every trial was necessary, every wound had a purpose, every moment of suffering was a tool in the hands of a loving God, and you will say, it was worth it. As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Some of you are asking, why does it have to be this way? Why do I have to suffer? Why does following Christ come with so much pain? But I ask you, have you forgotten who you follow? Have you forgotten the one who walked before you? Jesus Christ was not merely rejected, He was despised. He was not simply misunderstood, He was hated. He was not just wounded, He was crushed, and not by accident. Not because men were in control, not because things got out of hand. No, this was the plan of God. Some of you have built a Christianity in your minds that does not look like Christ. You want the blessing, the joy, the peace, but you do not want the suffering. You want to reign with Him, but you do not want to suffer with Him. You want His resurrection, but not His cross, and that is why you are struggling. That is why you are questioning. That is why you are shocked when the world turns against you, when people betray you, when the very ones you love wound you the deepest. But listen, this is exactly what He said would happen. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. A servant is not greater than his master. Do you understand what He is saying? If you are truly His, if you truly belong to Him, you will suffer as He suffered. You will be hated as He was hated. You will be rejected as He was rejected. Not because you have done something wrong, but because you are His, because you carry His name, because the darkness hates the light. Look at Him. Look at your Lord. He came into His own creation, and His own people did not receive Him. He healed the sick, raised the dead, opened blind eyes, and they called Him a blasphemer. They lied about Him. They conspired against Him, though He had done no wrong. They mocked Him, spit on Him, ripped the beard from His face. They whipped Him until His back was torn open, until He was unrecognizable. And when they nailed Him to a cross, He did not open His mouth to defend Himself. And you think you will escape suffering? You think following Him will cost you nothing? Some of you have been betrayed, abandoned, lied about, cast aside by people you trusted. And you think it is because something went wrong? But I tell you, it is because you are walking the same road He walked. It is because you have been counted worthy to suffer for His name. The question is not, why is this happening? The question is, will you pick up your cross and follow Him? Will you trust Him when it costs you everything? Will you still say, Lord, I am yours, when the ones closest to you turn against you? Some of you are still looking for comfort in this world. You are still trying to find a way to follow Christ and be liked by everyone. You still think you can live for him and be at peace with the world, but the world is at war with him. There is no middle ground. There is no friendship between light and darkness. They hated him. They will hate you. They rejected him. Look at the apostles. They did not live comfortable lives. They did not build kingdoms for themselves. They were beaten, stoned, imprisoned, driven from city to city, hated by the world. And what did they say? Did they complain? Did they ask, why is God letting this happen? No. They rejoiced. They rejoiced that they were counted worthy to suffer for his name. Some of you are still trying to hold on to this world. You want people to approve of you. You want to be accepted. You want to be loved by everyone. But Jesus said, woe to you when all people speak well of you. If you are loved by this world, it is because you belong to it. If you are comfortable here, it is because you are still clinging to it. But if you belong to him, you will suffer as he suffered. And some of you, listen to me, some of you have been so wounded, so crushed, so rejected that you are wondering if you can even go on. You are asking, Lord, how much more can I take? You feel like you are being broken beyond repair, but listen, he was broken first. He was crushed for your iniquities. He was despised, forsaken, stricken, and he walked that road alone so that you would never walk it alone. When you suffer, he is not distant. He is not a God far off. He is the man of sorrows. He knows your pain. He feels your wounds, and he is using them, every single one, to make you more like himself. Stop looking for an easy way. There is no easy way. There is only his way, and his way is the cross. But hear me, after the cross there is a resurrection. After the suffering there is glory. After the wounds there is healing. The world thinks it wins when it wounds you, when it casts you out, when it breaks you. But they thought they won when they crucified him. They thought they had silenced him, destroyed him, but 3 days later he rose, and so will you. On that day when you stand before him, when every tear is wiped away, when the sufferings of this present world fade in the light of his glory, you will not regret a single wound. You will not look back and wish it had been easier. You will not question why it had to hurt so much. You will see that every betrayal, every rejection, every moment of suffering was shaping you into his image, and you will say it was worth it. As she sat watching the world go by, something caught her eye. It wasn't so much its color or shape, but the way it was moving. She squinted to see if she could better understand what it was and where it was going, but it didn't help. As she continued to stare into the distance, she didn't understand why this uneasiness was building inside her body. Some of you are sitting here right now carrying wounds so deep that you don't know if you'll ever heal. You've been hurt, abandoned, slandered, falsely accused, mistreated by people you trusted, and in the quiet of your heart you've asked God why. You've begged him to take the pain away, to fix what was broken, to restore what was lost, but heaven seemed silent. And so now you wrestle not just with the pain of what was done to you, but with the greater agony of wondering if God even sees, if he even cares. But listen, he sees, and he cares more than you know. The very thing you thought was meant to destroy you, God is using to make you more like Christ. The wounds that you thought would break you are the very wounds he is using to sanctify you. You see, we misunderstand suffering because we measure it by the standards of this world. We think pain is always bad, that rejection means we are forgotten, that betrayal means we are alone, but that is not how God sees it. God is not interested in making you comfortable. He's interested in making you holy, and holiness does not come from an easy life. Holiness is forged in the fire. You say, but it hurts too much. Yes, it does, and that is the point. God does not use the things that do not cut deeply. He does not work through shallow wounds. The deepest wounds, the ones that feel like they will never heal, those are the ones he presses on. Those are the ones he redeems. Those are the ones he transforms. Look at Christ. When he rose from the dead, he did not erase his scars. He still bore them. Why? Why would the Son of God in all his glory and all his perfection keep the marks of his suffering? Because those scars tell a story. They testify to the victory of God. They are not marks of shame. They are marks of triumph. And so it will be with you. Some of you want to move past the pain, to forget what happened, to erase the past. But that is not how God works. He does not erase. He redeems. He does not just bring healing, he brings purpose. And one day, the very scars that you wish would disappear will be the testimony of his faithfulness in your life. You say, but they hurt me so deeply. Yes, they did, and they meant it for evil. But God meant it for good. Do you hear that? He meant it. He didn't just allow it. He didn't just work around it, he meant it for your good. Just as he meant the betrayal of Joseph for good, just as he meant the suffering of Job for good, just as he meant the crucifixion of Christ for good. And if he meant it for good, that means nothing was wasted. Not a single tear, not a single sleepless night, not a single moment of suffering. Every bit of it was used by the hands of a sovereign God to shape you, to refine you, to break you free from everything that is not of him. Some of you are waiting for closure, for an apology that will never come, for justice that may never be served in this life. And so you are holding on to bitterness, to anger, to resentment, thinking that somehow by doing so you are making things right. But you are not. You are only imprisoning yourself. Listen to me. God is your justice. He is your defender. He will repay. You do not need to carry the weight of vengeance because he has already declared, vengeance is mine, I will repay. The people who hurt you, who abandoned you, who betrayed you, they are not outside of his justice. Either they will repent and be forgiven, or they will face him on the day of judgment. But you are not called to hold on to bitterness. You are called to let go, not because they deserve it, but because you trust God more than your own sense of justice, because you believe that he is in control, because you understand that no one gets away with anything before a holy God. And listen, letting go is not weakness. It is not pretending like nothing happened. It is placing the weight of it in the hands of the only one who is worthy to judge. It is surrendering the burden you were never meant to carry. Some of you are afraid that if you let go, if you move forward, it means what happened didn't matter. But that is not true. Forgiveness does not mean you forget. It does not mean you excuse sin. It does not mean you pretend the wounds aren't real. It means you refuse to let the enemy use those wounds to destroy you. Do not give him that power. The enemy would love for you to stay trapped in bitterness. He would love for you to be consumed with anger, to be paralyzed by what was done to you. Because as long as you are looking backward, you cannot move forward. As long as you are holding on to the pain, you cannot walk in the freedom Christ purchased for you. But Christ did not die so that you would live in chains. He did not bear your suffering so that you would be a prisoner to it. He rose so that you would be free. Some of you are waiting for the day when the pain will make sense. But let me tell you, sometimes it will not make sense in this life. Sometimes you will not see the full picture until you stand before him. And in that moment, when you see his face, when you see the story he was writing all along, when you see how every wound, every tear, every trial was shaping you for glory, you will not question anymore. And you will not wish it had been easier. You will not wish he had spared you from the fire. You will fall before him and say, it was worth it.